Hello, my name's Carl Brown, and I'm one of the ministers at North Highlands Baptist Church. And this is my home, and I'd like to welcome you as we get ready to get into another backyard Bible study this week. So, if you would, put away any distractions. Get out something to take notes with if you like to take notes. And let's get into the Word. This week we're really going to get into the second of three judgments for the sins of David that he had, that Nathan told him about when he had adultery, committed adultery with Bathsheba, but also, killed Uriah the Hittite using the sword of the Ammonites. So Lord judged him for that. One, he lost the son that was birthed from that affair. And the other things that were supposed to happen is, one, war would never leave his household. And so this is part of that judgment, but the other part, the third part of that judgment, is that what David did in secret was going to happen to David, against David, in public for all to see. So this sexual sin that David had in private, there's going to be a sexual sin against David for everybody to see in public. That's going to happen today. Today we are really talking about the life of Absalom, David's son. Now, last week we talked about how Absalom was a beautiful man, that he was just admired by everybody from head to toe. There wasn't a blemish on him, and he had wonderful hair, just great, thick, heavy hair, and he was very handsome. So he always caught everybody's eye, which is exactly, what we see when we see fictional princes in all of our culture. Well, David had a son, a prince that was for real the most handsome man in all the land. And David wasn't so good with the parenting thing. He was great at being a king most of the time, but when it came to parenting, apparently not so good. Absalom's sister Tamar was raped by his half brother, and David did not give immediate justice to Tamar. And so Absalom took the law into his own hands and killed him, lived in exile a couple of years, came back from exile. Tamar's still living with Absalom, so it's a constant reminder to him every day, and he even named his daughter after her, so he really loved her. But those things happening really began to turn the heart of Absalom against his father and made him a rebel. And that's really kind of where we kick in today. We talk about the treachery of Absalom and his treason, and it starts in chapter 15. We'll be in chapters 15 through 19 today of 2 Samuel. It says, after this happened, what I just told you about, Absalom provided himself with chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. Now Absalom would rise early and stand beside the way to the gate. So it was, whenever anyone who had a lawsuit came to the king for a decision, that Absalom would call to him and say, "What city are you from?" And he would say, "Your servant is such and such a tribe of Israel." Then Absalom would say to him, "Look, your case is good and right, but there is no deputy of the king to hear you." Moreover, Absalom would say, "Oh, that I were made judge in the land. Then everyone who has any suit or cause would come to me, and I would give him justice." And so it was, whenever anyone came near to bow to him, that he would put out his hand and take him and kiss him. In this manner, Absalom acted toward all Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. So what's going on here? Absalom has gotten back. He's been back in Jerusalem for 2 years, and finally he maneuvers to get Joab to get David to forgive him. So David's forgiven Absalom. Now Absalom has gone out and he's got him chariots and men, 50 men, to hang out with him all the time to make him look, well, royal. like he's a really important person. And then he sits at the gates of the city where all the business is done at this time. And as people are coming in from out of town from all over the kingdom of Israel to get a judgment in their case from David, Absalom takes them aside and he smoozes them and he says, hey, brother, I just wish I could do this because, you're absolutely right. The person against you is absolutely wrong. Your case is good and correct. Oh, that I were king. If I were just king, then I would certainly take care of your situation. And then anytime they went to bow to him, he'd grab their hand, pull them in and give them a kiss and make them feel like brothers, And it says that Absalom stole the hearts of men. And sure enough, he was a good politician because that's what he did. For 4 years, he started this campaign and worked the city gate and got everybody to really think about Absalom, talk about Absalom, think Absalom's on their side, think that he's going to be a fantastic king when David's gone. Oh, I wish he were king now because then my case would be taken care of. It was a beautiful piece of politics that Absalom did, and him being beautiful and handsome and a warrior didn't hurt his case either. And so everybody was talking about him. He won over the hearts of Israel. Everybody's talking about Absalom. He's the most popular man in all of Israel. And so Absalom's done this because in his mind, he's a rebel, and he's got this idea of a coup, a military coup to take over and be the king instead of his dad. So how long did it last? How long did he do this? I think I just told you that it was 4 years, but there's a little discrepancy here in the scripture, and I just want to point it out. In verse 7, it says, now it came to pass after 40 years that Absalom said to the king. Your translation may say after 4 years. This one says 40. And this is an NIV Bible, and other NIV Bibles say 4 years. Why are there so many? Why does it say 40 in so many Bibles and 4 in other Bibles? Well, the King James Version said 40, and a lot of scholars believe that it was actually an error, just a typo error that the scholars of King James actually made. Because the Septuagint, which is the scripture that was copied in Greek by Josephus back in 250 BC, said 4 years. And the King James Version, which was made way after that in the 1600s, said 40 years. And so it may have been 40, it may have been 4, but if 4 makes sense. For 4 years, Absalom did this. If it's saying after 40 years, it couldn't have been 40 years after that Absalom waited 40 years because David was only king for 42 plus years, and Absalom was born after he had, when he was out in the wilderness. So that, before he was made king, it would have been way too long. So that math doesn't work. So if it is 40 years, it's 40 years from some other marker, not 40 years that Absalom was going in front of the gate every single day. My best guess, 4 years. 4 years Absalom did this. And he showed that kind of patience because he waited 2 years before he killed his stepbrother. He was in exile for 2 years, and now he's come back and he's been forgiven by David. So for 4 years, at least, let's say it that way, he has been turning the hearts of Israel and campaigning against his dad. So now he's birthed a plan. He comes to him in verse 7, says to David, please let me go to Hebron and pay the vow which I made to the Lord. For your servant took a vow while I dealt in Gersha and Syria, saying, if the Lord indeed brings me back to Jerusalem, then I will serve the Lord. The king said to him, go in peace. So he arose and went to Hebron. So he's told his dad that he made a promise that he was going to be a faithful to the Lord if the Lord ever let him come back to Jerusalem. Well, the Lord let him do that 6 years earlier. And so now he's going to go to Hebron, which is where he was born and where David was first crowned king over Judah. But is that what he's really doing? Not at all. Look at verse 10. Then Absalom sent spies throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then you shall say, Absalom reigns in Hebron. And with Absalom went 200 men invited from Jerusalem, and they went along innocently and did not know anything. Then Absalom sent for Heathofel. I get tripped up on this name. I think it is Heathofel, the Gilonite, David's counselor from his city in Gillo, while he offered sacrifices, and the conspiracy grew strong, for the people with Absalom continually increased in number. So now Absalom has sent spies throughout the land and has them tell him, because it's before cell phones, it's before news coverage, and so he has them blow these trumpets and tell everyone that Absalom's reigning in Hebron, that Absalom's a king, and people are excited because they all love Absalom, like, oh, this is great, he's king of a province, oh, this is great. And so they start to build and follow him and come to him, which is exactly what he wants, until he really has all of Israel on his side. Verse 13, now a messenger came to David saying, the hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom. Well, David finds out what's going on, that Absalom's raised an army, that Absalom has turned the hearts of everybody. He probably has known that this was happening for years and hasn't done anything about it. This is another failing of David as a parent and as a king, that he just had a soft spot, a weakness for his children. And, can you blame him? I don't know. It has to be difficult. But it was a weakness that he had when his children were sinning and dividing the kingdom. He let them do it. And so now Absalom has the hearts of the people of Israel. He's raised kind of an army. They've all backed him behind him. They all want to make him king. And David's been told. So David flees. Just it doesn't seem like David does it to run away. Again, I just don't think that he wanted to have an open conflict with Absalom, his son, and he was depressed. I'm sure he was depressed about it all, and he just didn't have it. It just wasn't in him to do it. And again, this is also part of the Lord's plan for his judgment against him. So David gets all of his household, and he leaves Jerusalem. And he leaves 10 of his concubines, his mistresses. He leaves 10 of his mistresses in Jerusalem to take care of the palace. And then he takes everybody else and he flees. And it's sad. It says that as he's leaving, that they're going out with weeping. Look, verse 30 says, so David went up by the ascent of the Mount of Olives and wept as he went up. And he had his head covered and went barefoot. And all the people who were with him covered their heads and went up weeping as they went up. Then someone told David, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. And David said, O Lord, I pray turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. David left 10 concubines to take care of the city, the palace. And he went out weeping. Now, there are several people that fall on one side or the other in these next few chapters, and I want to go over the different characters that we're about to get into. First one is Ittai the Gittite. The Gittite, He was going with the king, and the king comes up to him, and it's really kind of neat. He comes up to this foreigner, and he says, "What are you doing with me? You don't have to follow me. I'm going in exile. I'm going to be roaming to and fro. I don't know where I'm going. You only came to serve me yesterday. Why are you feeling like you're obligated to stay with me now?" And Ittai just really lays it and says, hey, sort of kind of a Ruth moment. He says, you're my king. I'm your servant, and I'm going to follow you wherever you go. Look at that. Hey, little friend. I've never seen one like that. If you're watching the video, what is this? What kind of caterpillar is that? I've never seen anything like that before. That's crazy. There we go. Oh, where was I? I don't know. What was I saying? So he stays with them. Then Zadok the high priest takes the Ark of the Covenant, and he starts to leave with David too. And David said, no, we're not doing that again. We're not taking the Ark of the Covenant away from Jerusalem again. That's where it belongs. That's where the Lord's house is going to be. That's where we're going to keep it. You stay there. You stay with your sons. And I'll tell you what, if the Lord finds favor with me, then I'll be back. But don't you leave. You stay here and you serve the Lord and you keep the Ark of the Covenant here. And your sons, hey, I tell you what you can do. Your sons can come tell me what's going on if they need to. So Zadok and his sons were faithful to him, the high priest and his sons. And then Hushai, let's call him Hushai. Then Hushai comes across, and this is a friend of David that was a counselor. And he comes and he has ashes on his head. And he's like, oh, I'm going with you. And David's like, no, I don't want you to go with me. I got a better idea. You're a counselor. You're one of the wise men. I want you, Hushai, to be my spy. He says, I want you to go in there and I want you to infiltrate Absalom's confidence and be a spy and then tell me everything that's going on. I need you on the inside. And so he was faithful. So now David crosses this brook and he's going, and who comes up to him but Ziba? Ziba is Mephibosheth's servant now. You know, the servant of Saul that David gave to Mephibosheth to work his lands. And Ziba comes and he gives supplies to David and is a real blessing to him. And David asked a very legitimate question. Well, where's Mephibosheth? He's the one that I made a prince and eats at my table every day. And Ziba says, Mephibosheth said when you went out of the city that good, now I will get everything that belongs to me from Saul. And when David heard that, about this betrayal from Mephibosheth, he said, Ziba, you can have it all. You get all of Saul's lands. It's all yours now. You're no longer the servant. You're the master. It's all yours. So Ziba was faithful. And then Joab was faithful, the commander, and Abishai was also faithful, Joab's brother, who was one of the generals. And Judah was faithful. The men of Judah were faithful to him. And he's from the tribe of Judah, but the men of Judah are faithful to him and his 600 men. Remember when he was going around throughout all of the land of Israel and Judah and all the land of the Canaanites and the Philistines? He had his 600 men that he took with him, his mighty warriors, his band of thieves or scoundrels or whatever that stuck with him. Those guys stayed with him still, and they went with him. But there are also people that are disloyal. And the first person we know that's disloyal is obviously Absalom. And then we find out through Ziba that it sounds like Mephibosheth is disloyal. And then there's this other guy. And I want you to see this other guy. This guy, Shimei. Shimei is of the household of Saul, and he's a relative of Saul, and he comes out. Look at this in chapter 16, verse 5b. Now, these people are depressed. They're on a march. They're leaving the city. They see the palace behind them, and out comes this Shimei. He says he came out cursing continually as he came, and he threw stones at David and all the servants of King David, and all the people and all the mighty men were on his right and on his left. This guy has no fear, absolutely is thrilled that David is out of office and that he's been shamed and humiliated, and he adds to it by cussing them and throwing stones at them. It's amazing he lived through this. As a matter of fact, Abishai said, I could take him out. Let me just take him out. I don't have any problem doing that. And David said, no. He says, no, if the Lord has Shimei curse me, then I deserve cursing, and let the Lord deal with him. And he just lets him do it. Well, he may have regretted that because he just kept doing it. And verse 13, and as David and his men went along the road, Shimei went along the hillside opposite him and cursed as he went, threw stones at him, and kicked up dust. Wow. This guy was a pain in the neck, wasn't he? Oh, man. And you're walking there with David, and this guy hits you with a rock, and you can't go over there and take him out? That had to be hard. But there you go. So he wasn't loyal. And then Heathofel. Heathofel was David's trusted counselor. And let's just talk about him for a minute. He was his trusted counselor, but Absalom had turned his heart against David, and he had called for him, and he came to Absalom. And then when David was told that his trusted counselor was with Absalom, he prayed to the Lord. He said, Lord, may his counsel turn to foolishness. So he was known for being a good counsel and not having foolish counsel. And so he had a great reputation. It talks about his reputation at the very last verse of this chapter, chapter 16. It says, now the advice of Ahithophel, which he gave in those days, was as if one had inquired at the oracle of God. So was all the advice of Ahithophel, both with David and with Absalom. So he had a great reputation for giving really good advice and was well respected and throughout the land. But Absalom had turned his heart against David, and so now he had betrayed David and committed treason. So that's all the characters in the play. David is left. Absalom has come now into Jerusalem. And let's see what this advice he gets here. Verse 20, then Absalom said to Ahithophel, give advice as to what we should do. And Ahithophel, I can't say his name, Ahithophel said to Absalom, go and have sex with your father's concubines, whom he has left to keep the house, and all Israel will hear that you are abhorred by your father. Then the hands of all who are with you will be strong. So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the top of the house, and Absalom went into his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. You have got to catch this irony of ironies that the Lord has brought about because of David's secret sin. On the same rooftop of the same house where David was walking and he saw Bathsheba, Absalom takes his 10 concubines, his mistresses, puts a tent up there, and in broad daylight has sex with his concubines for everybody to see. Just has this what do they call it, orgy up there on top of the king's palace. Jeez. And so the second part of the judgment of God against David happens. But Ahithophel had more advice than that. He tells him that now that you've done that, and somehow that makes Israel stronger on your side because they know that that David doesn't like you and you have no choice but to fight him now. He says, you need to go, you need to take 12,000 men. I'll tell you what, I'll take 12,000 men and I'll go and we will cut the head off the snake. We'll go get David and we'll kill David. And when we do that, you are so popular, and we don't want to have battle with all the men of Judah and all the other people. If we just kill David, then everybody will join on your side because nobody wants to have a battle between all the Israelites and all the different tribes of Judah. Okay. Absalom took that advice in. Then he looks over at Hushai and he says, Hushai, what's your advice? What do you say about this? This probably had to set Ahithophel back because he was used to his advice being taken right away. I mean, he had just given this advice about the orgy and he had jumped on that. And now when it comes to taking out David, he thinks he gives great advice, and Absalom looks to Hushai and asks for his advice. And this is the advice of Hushai. I like it. He goes, did you forget who your dad is? Have you forgotten who David is and what he has done and who he's with? His 600 mighty warriors and his 30 mighty men. Have you forgotten that those are the guys that are with him? Do you remember what your dad did? Did you forget that he knows how to hide? He's probably hiding now, and he's fantastic at guerrilla warfare. And if he's doing guerrilla warfare against your superior army, they're going to see that Absalom has got losses and David is winning in these little skirmishes, and all the hearts of the men will fail, and they'll all go to home, and you won't have an army, and David will come and get you. And that's his advice. He said, take the whole army, take all of them, everybody you can muster, and go at him with the entire army, and when you find where he's at, surround him and destroy everybody. And Absalom saw that he was right. He was like, you know what, my dad, he may be 70, but he sure is good with a sword, and he's got all his guys with him. It'd probably be best if I don't go out here and just do a one-on-one. I tell you what, we're going to take Hushai's advice and not Ahithophel. Now, Ahithophel, the counselor, you've got to see there that God answered David's prayer. David is still suffering the consequence of his sin, but God is on his side because of his confession, his repentance, and his seeking the Lord. God is still on his side. And when David prayed that Ahithophel's advice would not be taken outside of the orgy thing, God granted that request, and Ahithophel, in his betrayal, was not able to advise on how to take out the king. And so what does Ahithophel do? Ahithophel has quite the pity party. As a matter of fact, let's look at it. Verse 23 of chapter 17. It's crazy. Verse 23 of 16 tells how awesome Ahithophel was in the eyes of David and Absalom. And now we're just exactly one chapter past that. 17 verse 23 says, now when Ahithophel saw that his advice was not followed, he saddled a donkey and arose and went home to his house, to his city, and he put his household in order and hanged himself and died, and he was buried in his father's tomb. That is a first-class pity party. He was not having it. If you're not going to take my advice, if I'm not going to be the advisor to the king, I'm just going to go kill myself. And he did. So, and so what does Hushai do? Hushai, he does what he's supposed to do as a spy. He sends word out. It took quite an effort, but he got word to David about what was happening. And so David goes to a good land with gives him better opportunity, has a military advantage, and he gets there with all of his people, and the Lord sends all these different people in Israel to come minister to him, especially this one guy named Barzillai. Is that his name? Barzillai. Yeah, Barzillai. That's it. Not Godzilla, Barzillai. God sends Barzillai probably, to minister to David and to give them supplies, and where they can get ready for the battle that's coming. And the battle does come. Chapter 18. And then verse 2. Then David sent out a third of the people under the hand of Joab, 1/3 under the hand of Abishai, which is Joab's brother, already a general, and 1/3 under the hand of Ittai the Gittite. And the king said to the people, I will also surely go out with you myself. Now Ittai the Gittite, this is a guy who must have had quite a reputation, who had come to serve him just days before, and he puts him in charge of 1/3 of the army. David wanted to go out with him. I mean, he's in his 70s, but he wanted to go out with them and fight. And the people said, no, if you're out there, they're just going to come after you. If we run away or if we get, it's no big deal. But we can't have our king die. We can't have you die. So you stay here. And He's like, well, if you say so. And then he sees them all off. He stands at the gate and sees them all off. Verse 5. Now the king had commanded Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, saying, deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom. And all the people heard when the king gave all the captains orders concerning Absalom. David said, don't kill my boy. Don't kill my boy. Don't kill Absalom. Have pity on him. Have mercy on him. He's probably, as a father, feels really guilty. He feels like Absalom's kind of his fault. And in some ways, it is. But Absalom's still a man, and he still makes his own decisions. And he has committed treason. He has risen an army up. He has divided the land. He is a traitor in every sense of the word. And he's even had sex with the concubines of his father. He's an abomination now, and he needs to be dealt with. But King David it's not in his heart to destroy him. He still loves him. David had quite the heart, didn't he? Well, verse 6, it says, so the men went out into the field of battle against Israel. And this is always sad, because now you have Israelites fighting Israelites. And the battle was in the woods of Ephraim. The people of Israel were overthrown there before the servants of David, and a great slaughter of 20,000 took place there that day. For the battle was scattered over the face of the whole countryside, and the woods devoured more people that day than the sword devoured. That sounds really interesting, doesn't it? Now, I know that many of you watching this are probably not fans of the fictional work called The Lord of the Rings. But in The Lord of the Rings, we have a battle like this where it's fantasy, but this army is in the woods, and the trees actually fight for the good guys and eliminate most of the army. And so that's what this sounds like. It said that the woods devoured most of the men instead of the sword. And so a lot of people died because of the territory that David wisely chosen to fight the battle. And so what does it mean that it destroyed it? Well, if you read Josephus, he talked about how the animals in the woods devoured some of them. So most scholars believe that there were pits that they fell into, that there was swamp that was there, that, and that caused them to bog down. Maybe they couldn't turn, maybe they couldn't fight, maybe they fell in quicksand, maybe they fell on stumps and they were impaled. But the beast getting involved, the wolves, the tigers, the lions and the bears, oh my, all of them get involved. I don't know, but the Lord gave the victory. So all of nature is at play when the Lord gives the victory. It's far and beyond what we can do on our own. I just think it's really interesting. I would love to actually ask that question when we get to heaven. I would love to actually see film of what happened there when they say that the woods devoured more people that day than the sword devoured. But it's a great victory for David because 20,000 people die in this civil war that is happening. Let's read what happens next. Then Absalom met the servants of David. Absalom rode on a mule. The mule went under thick boughs of a great terebinth tree, and his head caught in the terebinth, so it was left hanging. He was left hanging between heaven and earth, and the mule which was under him went on. Now a certain man saw it and told Joab, saying, I just saw Absalom hanging in the terebinth tree. So this beautiful locks of hairs that Absalom had been so proud of and let grow long had been his undoing, because as he's running away through these woods, his hair gets caught in this tree and he is literally hanging there by his hair. Oh my. Verse 11. So Joab said to the man who told him, you just saw him? And why didn't you strike him there to the ground? I would have given you 10 shekels of silver and a belt. But the man said to Joab, Though I were to receive 1,000 shekels of silver in my hand, I would not raise my hand against the king's son. For in our hearing the king commanded you and Abishai and Ittai, saying, Beware lest anyone touch the young man Absalom. Otherwise I would have dealt falsely against my own life. For there is nothing hidden from the king, and you yourself have set yourself against me. You're not thinking of my best interest if you're asking me to go kill that guy, because David's going to kill me. And then Joab said, I cannot linger with you. Joab's so frustrated, just like, I can't deal with you right now. I can't, just get out of my face. I can't deal with you. And so Joab took 3 spears in his hand and thrust them through Absalom's heart. And while he was still alive in the midst of the terebinth tree, and 10 young men who had bore Joab's armor surrounded Absalom and struck and killed him. So death by 1,000 daggers, kind of a Brutus Caesar kind of thing. Don't know exactly who did it. They don't want David to know exactly who killed him, so they all kill him. But Joab did it. Joab went and he put 3 spears through his heart, like one wasn't enough. And then 10 other guys went and they stabbed him a bunch of times. And so just looking at it, you couldn't tell who did it. But they didn't leave it there. Then they took his body down and they threw it in a pit, and then they filled the pit with rocks. So they totally took care of it. And Absalom is dead. He's really dead. Double dead. Triple dead. Quadruple dead. Many times more than that, and I don't know the word dead, and thrown in the pit and stoned dead. They were mad at Absalom, and they made sure he was gone. So Absalom had so many reasons to think well of himself when he was living. He had a charisma and a magnetic personality to where he was able to easily get people to join his side. That was a powerful gift he'd been given. And he'd been given incredibly good looks, was extremely handsome. And that's another way of persuading people. So he had all these gifts, and his father was the king and he was the crown prince. All that was going for him. And he got full of himself. He got full of pride. Matter of fact, look at the last thing said about him here in verse 18. Now Absalom in his lifetime had taken and set up a pillar for himself, which is in the king's valley, for he said, I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. He called the pillar after his own name, and to this day it is called Absalom's monument. He set up a monument of himself. Does that remind you of anybody? Remember Saul did that? And he set up a monument to himself. I'm so great, I need to be remembered. I'm going to put this up here where everybody will remember me because I'm so awesome. What's our lesson today? This is our overall lesson today. First lesson. Sin has consequences. We talked about that last week. We're reading all about it this week. The main lesson we learn from Absalom is this. Pride goes before a fall. That kind of pride precedes a great fall. And as quickly as Absalom rose to power and popularity, now he's thrice quadruple dead at the bottom of a pit covered in stones, never to be honored again. So pride comes before the fall. Always keep pride in check in your heart. And that's one good lesson from Absalom. The other one is keep your hair short. I wonder if this is why military men shave their heads nowadays. Don't want to get caught in a terebinth tree. Joab goes against orders and he kills Absalom, kills him dead dog dead. And Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, the high priest, one of the priests, says, I want to go give David the news. Let me go give David the news. This is a great victory. I'm going to go give David the news. And Joab goes, whoa, wait a minute. You don't need to go give David this news. The king's son, Absalom, is dead. He's not going to take it well. We need to send a red shirt in to give this news. Hey, you Cushite, you go. Mr. No-Name Cushite, you go. Red shirt being a Star Trek reference. People who know Star Trek know what I'm saying there. And so he sends a red shirt to go. He says, you're a main character. You can't go tell him, because David has not reacted well to this kind of news before. When he was told about Saul and Jonathan, he killed the messenger. When he was told about Ishbosheth, he killed that messenger. And now it's his own son, and you're going to go tell him, and you think he's not going to kill you? You're crazy. No, let this other guy go. Well, this son of Zadok couldn't let it go. He said, please let me go. Please let me go. He says, fine. It's your life's in your own hands. Go. And so he takes off, and Ahimaaz overtakes the Cushite that he's already sent, and he gets to David first. And when he gets to David, I love this. When he tells David that he has a great victory and that God has blessed him and delivered him and raised his hand, and delivered the men who raised their hand against David. Verse 29 of chapter 18, then the king said, is the young man Absalom safe? Get what Ahimaaz answers. He goes, I'm not sure. There was something going on over there, but I'm not really sure what it was. Look what he says. When Joab sent the king's servant and me, your servant, I saw a great tumult, a disturbance over there, but I did not know what it was about. Ahimaaz lies. He's lying. He's like, I don't know. You had the victory about. No, as far about Absalom, I'm not sure. There was something going on. I don't know. And the king says, "You stand right here, and let's wait on this Cushite, the red shirt, to come in." So the Cushite came. And he says, there is good news, my lord the king, for the Lord has avenged you this day of all those who rose against you. And the king, David, said to the Cushite, is the young man Absalom safe? So the Cushite answered, and this is good, because remember, when David really got angry is when somebody was proud, took credit for killing the other people. So someone took credit for killing Saul and Jonathan, the Lord's anointed, and David killed him. Someone took credit for killing Ishbosheth, the next king, by bloodline, and they took credit. Well, actually, they didn't just take credit. They'd actually done it. And so David killed him. This guy doesn't say anything like that. The Cushite answered, may the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise against you to do harm be like that young man. Doesn't tell him he's dead. He says, may they all just be like that guy. But David gets the point. And David, verse 33, the king was moved deeply and went to the chamber over the gate and wept. And as he went, he said thus, O my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died in your place, O Absalom, my son, my son. Let's keep reading. Chapter 19. And Joab was told, behold, the king is weeping and mourning for Absalom. So the victory that day was turned into mourning for all the people. For the people heard it and said, the king is grieved for his son. And the people stole back into the city that day as people who are ashamed to steal away when they flee in battle. But the king covered his face, and the king cried out with a loud voice, O my son Absalom, O Absalom, my son, my son. Then Joab came into the house of the king and said, today, king, you have disgraced all your servants today who saved your life, the lives of your sons and daughters, the lives of your wives, and the lives of your concubines, in that you love your enemies and hate your friends. For you have declared today that you regard neither princes nor servants. For today I perceive that if Absalom had lived and all of us had died today, then it would have pleased you well. Now arise and go and speak and comfort your servants. David is in great grief about his son and feels the guilt of it and knows part of it is his fault. Of course, the greater amount being Absalom's fault, obviously, but still, the father is grieving his son. He loved his son, didn't want this to happen, and he can't get past his grief. And so what should have been a great day of victory and the civil war is over, instead becomes a day of mourning. And it says that the people snuck back into the city almost like they were ashamed of themselves instead of people who had won a great victory. And Joab was not having it. Joab's like, these people put their life on the line for you. These people right here were faithful to you. Your son wasn't. These people around you, they fought for you and died for you today. And Absalom was a traitor and betrayed you and was a terrible son. And more than that, he was an enemy of the state. And we defeated him. It's a great day. It's a great victory. And you need to act like it. Go out there, suck it up, and encourage your servants. You know what? Joab and David were right in this instance. David was right to be grieved by his son. He shouldn't feel victorious when you kill a traitor and when you've been in a civil war. Civil wars, both sides are losers in a civil war, I should say, because you're killing your own people. And it's horrible that it came to that. But Joab was right too, in that the right side had prevailed, and that the people who had loved him and were faithful to him need encouraged for what they had done, because they felt horrible about killing 20,000 Israelites as well. And so he needed to be the king. Step up. You're not just the father, you're the king. Step up and be king. And so he did. He stepped out and he sat on his throne, and they came before the king. What's the lesson we learned from that? No one wins when we sin. Can you remember that? No one wins when we sin. Make it more personal. No one wins when I sin. There you go. So David returns, and here's the interesting thing about his return. When he returns to Israel, some people come out to meet David before he gets back to the palace. Now, there's one character I forgot to tell you about. The one character I forgot to tell you about was who was in charge of Absalom's army. Since Joab and the other generals had went with David, he put Amasa in charge of his army. Amasa was a relative of Joab's, but he raised him from just, to being a captain over the entire army, or a general, as we would say. So he elevated him. And all the people of Israel liked him. And now David's trying to think of a way, in a kingly way, in a political way, to appease all the people of Israel who rose against him. And so in his mind, his way to do that was to keep Amasa as the major general, as the leader of all the troops. And so he makes Amasa leader of all the troops over Joab. And you know how Joab is. He's not going to like that. And we'll talk about that next week. And he does this before he comes back to the city. And that's good because he doesn't want to have to fight to get back into Jerusalem. So the compromise works. The treaty kind of works. And then when he's coming back to Jerusalem, there are a lot of people that came out to meet him. The first person that came out to meet him was Shimei. Shimei, the curser, the guy who had cursed him and thrown stones at him, comes out and he falls before him and he apologizes. He realizes, now I'm on the losing side, and he asks his forgiveness and says, I'm sorry, and I don't know what got into me. How could I be so ugly and mean to you when you were so down? You're truly the great king. You're the king. Oh, forgive me, king. Don't kill me. And David, he called David on a good day. David was like, you know what, today's a day of celebration. I'm not going to kill you. Go on your way. And he leaves him. He lets him go. And then who else shows up but Mephibosheth? And I don't know how he got out there. He's lame. But he got out there. He met the king before he got back in the city. And remember, Ziba had told him that he had turned against David. Mephibosheth comes out there and goes, I've been misrepresented. I've been slandered by my servant. I'm telling you right now, I did not say any of that. and I am faithful to you, and I couldn't follow you because I'm lame. I had no way to get to you. And David had already given all of his possessions to Ziba. And Mephibosheth says, well, fine, he can keep them. I just want to be in your household and your friend and your servant. I couldn't care less if he keeps all my stuff. So David doesn't know what to do. He does a real kingly thing here. He likes Ziba. Ziba's been his supporter the whole time. He's not sure if Ziba told the truth about Mephibosheth, but he's made a promise not to kill all the people of Saul, and yet he's taken all of his stuff away from him. So he just divides it in half. He says, you two guys split it up. You split up. Ziba, you can have half, and Mephibosheth, you can have half of all Saul's things. And he just leaves it there. And then the last person we see that he is grateful to, that meets him there, that crosses with him, is Barzillai. And Barzillai, we find out more information about here, is very old. He's 80 years old and very wealthy. And David's like, you've been so good to me. You've given me so much. Come into the city with me. Stay with me. And I love what Barzillai says here, and it really comes across like a contented old man. He's like, no thanks. I'm good. I just want to go home in my house. He says, there's not going to be any good for me to be at your house. I'm old. I can't taste the food. I can't see the celebrations. I can't, I'm no good to you here. Let me just go home and die at my house. Let me just go home. And so David embraces him, kisses him, and sends him on his way as with the king's gratitude. And that's all we're going to cover today. We're going to finish the chapter 19 and get into chapters 20 through 24 next week as we continue on with the rest of David's life. And we'll finish up David's life next week, really. And we'll learn a lot, some really interesting things. We get a lot more information about his mighty men next week, and the last words of David, and the finishing up of the consequences of his sin. That's all next week. I hope you enjoyed this week. Just remember, sin has consequences. Pride comes before a fall, and no one wins when we sin. I hope you enjoyed those lessons. I'll see you next week.